All right, we're now recording this. So, one of the things coming up tomorrow. Sorry, I made notes for myself and I'm like, what does that note even mean? Tomorrow, if you haven't seen this, there's a housing forecast on that the Northern Wasatch Association is doing. Some of you may have seen a link to it. I want to share my screen with you really quick. Okay. One of the things that I want to show you, we don't have the housing forecast on here, but in the Northern Wasatch Association, they've been sending emails out. You can attend via Zoom, and there are different forecasters out there. The one talking tomorrow is one that I like. He tends to be pretty accurate with his forecasts. So maybe something that you want to jump on tomorrow at 10 a.m. And again, you can do that via Zoom. I want to make sure, one of the things I want to share with you in our Tuesday meetings is some of the resources that we have. We have started a little campaign. Some of you may have seen some of the emails where it's sending emails out saying, hey, were you aware of this? We provide a lot of resources that some agents aren't aware of or they've forgotten about it. One of the ones I want to show you is if you go to Elevate and you click on the training, if you go all the way down, so homepage, go all the way down to equity training and click on that, it takes you to this. And here's our equity training calendar. So super easy for you to find. Some people are wondering, hey, what's going on today? You know, can I get a link for it? Or I didn't get the email, because a lot of the emails that I send out, because I'm sending mass emails, they get tagged as spam all the time. So if you're ever wondering, you can just go there and very quickly, you've got a link to our training calendar. And so Jake is putting all of the different classes in here, and that's a great resource for you. Besides that, there's training for .loop. There's some of the videos that I do for my Thursday trainings are on here. So anyways, lots of different training resources available for you. And I wanted to make sure I'm pointing that out so that you guys were aware of that and could maybe go in and play around, look around a little bit. So anyways, tomorrow, as far as other training goes, we've got the housing forecast Zoom call at 10 a.m. And again, if you wanted to go, if you don't have an email from the board, you can go probably to the board's website, to the Northern Wasatch Association, and you could probably get the link there. I also want to report, yes.
You do have to sign up for it. So they'd have to go to the board and sign up. You can send an email or you can call or whatever, and then they will send you the link.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I hope I signed up for it. Let's see here.
I got the link emailed yesterday. So if you signed up, that's when I got the link for it anyway.
Let me show you what I got. I don't know if this is fair to do this, but since it's just a link anyways. Let's see. Below is the Zoom link for the economic forecast. So there's your Zoom link for it if you want. You can just copy and paste that into your own calendar for tomorrow at 10 a.m. and you can get on it. And Don, even though you're down there in Cedar City, I think you could get on if you're curious. You're not a member of that board, but you could get on with that Zoom link there. So cool. All right. Let me report a little bit on the UAR Policy Summit yesterday. I drove through 3 different wrecks on the freeway to get there for you. So I hope you guys appreciate my bravery and dedication to you. But when we got down there, I was thinking it would be like talking about Utah Association of Realtors policies. But what it actually was all of the local politicians coming. So we had the Senate Majority Leader and the Minority Leader and a whole bunch of different politicians come in talking about issues for realtors. I don't get into politics a lot here. I want to be inclusive of everybody, but I will forewarn you, I'm conservative leaning. So hopefully that doesn't offend anybody here. a lot of this stuff shouldn't offend anyone. There were a couple of things I'm going to say that might, but one of the things that I want you to be aware of is we are very aware of the housing shortage. The politicians are very aware of the housing shortage. And where we get a lot of the problems is we've got great demand. There's lots of demand for housing, but the supply is hard. When you look into building and developing, I can't remember how much of the cost I've been told, but it's multiple tens of thousands of dollars in the, just getting through the hurdles. For example, I was looking at buying a lot that my brother owns, and it's 2.5 acres. I don't need 2.5 acres. And there's a big portion of it that I wouldn't want to do anything with because it borders Pleasant View Drive, which is a really busy road. It's one of the main roads. And there's a 250-foot border of Pleasant View Drive. And I went into the city and I talked to him, and I said, could I subdivide off an acre of this? And they said, well, you still have to have at least 100-foot footage. And I said, your frontage. And I said, well, that's easy. It's 250 feet. I could separate 150 foot of frontage off, which is still a massive lot, and have plenty of room. And then I met with the main city guy, and he says, well, if you did that, if you subdivided anything off, then you have to widen the road for that portion of the road. So I'm going to have to pay to widen Pleasant View Drive, which is a 10-mile road. I don't know how long it is, probably at least 10 miles. I have to pay to widen Pleasant View Drive for 250 feet. And I'm like, it's not wider anywhere else along that road. This road has been there forever. It's the same width everywhere you go. And they're like, it's the policy. He says, you're the fourth person I've talked to this year about that section of land, and nobody ever comes back. I'm like, yeah, because you're an asshole. So, and I'm recording this, aren't I? Anyways, yeah, if you know that guy, feel free to send him the link. Just kidding. Don't send him the link. But we see that problem everywhere with the city, right? Everybody understands we've got a problem. So I wanted to share with you something that they said yesterday that I thought was really profound. Everybody understands there's a housing shortage. They know that houses are too expensive. They know that their kids can't buy homes. They're worried about it. But when it comes to developing, they're like, oh yeah, we need to add more development, just not in my backyard. And every city does that. Yeah, we need to add development, but not here, because we don't want to lose our lifestyle. And this was very apparent when I bought a home up in Wellsville. I moved in, and they called it Wellsville Ranches. That was the name of the development. And I had so many people that I had never met before. These old farmers come up, well, it's not the ranches anymore because of you guys moving in. And I'm like, dude, I've lived in Cache Valley my entire life pretty much. And you're treating me like an outsider, like I've come in and infringed on you somehow. It is a very common thing, and we as realtors need to be involved, whether it's going to city council meetings, but we need to be involved in sharing the message. And this is the message: if you want to lose your lifestyle, keep doing what you're doing, because we're going to export all of our children to cheaper places to live. And there's no faster way. You're one generation away from losing your lifestyle by exporting your children. Okay, if they can't afford to buy here, they will have to move somewhere else. And then the people moving in are people from California or Oregon or somewhere else where prices are super high. Cost of living is, they showed a graph yesterday. It's over, for a lot of California, it's over 7 times to live there, 7 times what the average income is. That's not doable. And even in parts of Utah, it's 4 times. If you're 2 to 3 times your income, they say that's affordable. Anything more than that isn't. But we are the most expensive conservative states, red states. We're the most expensive place to live. And we do it by adding a lot of obstacles. So getting involved, sharing this idea that, look, you can do developments in one of 2 ways. You can try to block everything, in which case people go and they'll buy remote properties and they'll try to subdivide in all these random locations, which is why a lot of places in Utah, you go out middle of nowhere, there's a development. Or you can do it in a smart way. And if you develop in a smart way where you've got communities that are close to shopping, there's a lot of walking foot traffic, so it doesn't clutter up as much with, you know, everybody driving around, because you've built communities around shopping, and, you know, the higher density stuff is there where people can walk and they can do things. Anyways, if you do it in a smart way, and don't just fight it and say, no, absolutely not, so we go to these unincorporated areas and build out there. If you do it in a smart way, you can build very sustainable housing. Anyways, the politicians are extremely aware of this. They are aware that cities are very obstinate. We had city council people there yesterday that said, hey, I've got to listen to my constituents, and this is what they're saying. But as realtors, we should have the ears of the constituents, right? We're out there networking. Our challenge is talking to 10 to 20 people a day. If every realtor did that, we could spread some good messages out there. So one of my challenges for you would be to spread good information about what growth really means, what smart growth means, what intentional growth means. And it's important for water reasons. It's important for lots of different things. Now, so they're aware of that. They're aware of the water issues. They're investing, what do they say, $500 million last year, and they're doing that again this year on water infrastructure. So they're putting a lot of money into trying to make it sustainable growth, but there's a lot that we can do on our part to involve the community in a good way, so that people are actually educated and not making fear-based decisions or uneducated decisions on how their communities grow. Other policies, I would just encourage you to get involved. Again, I hate politics, but I would encourage you to get involved in some of the politics, because there are some buzzwords being passed around. The Democrats especially, they kept bringing up book bans. You know, like there's book bans, and I'm sitting right next to one of our other brokers, and she says, why would people ban books? This is like, seriously, this is like what they did in Hitler's time, banning books. And I said, you got to read between the lines here, because one of them also got up and said, you know, like with public schools, we've got people, members of the public, that don't even have kids in the schools, that are concerned about what we're teaching in the classrooms. And they don't even have kids in the schools. That's not their place. And I said, you read between the lines there too. And what they're saying is, we don't want the public telling us what to teach in public schools. Like, this is the government business. You stay out of the government business. We'll teach whatever the hell we want. I said, that's what they're doing. And when they're talking about book bans, these are the kind of books that they're banning. They're not banning, you know, How to Kill a Mockingbird or something like that. I said, what they're trying to do is stop parents from being involved. So I would encourage you guys to be involved. Whatever your political leanings are, get involved with it and actually read between the lines, because they're politicians. They have really good buzzwords, way to spin things, but get in and actually read things, because you're going to see things promoted about, you know, for coming elections and bills and things like that, about book bans and stuff. Actually get in and read it, because nobody's talking about going in and burning books like they did at the time of the Nazis. Okay. It's deeper than that. And so I would just encourage you all to be a little bit involved with it, because there were some concerning things talked about. All right. That's all I'm going to talk about that. On to our deep dive. Do you guys have any questions? First of all, things that you have had burning questions on your mind for a while that you want to, or should we just jump right in? Okay, jump in with you. Okay, we're going to go to the legacy forms. By the way, I saw something that I had never seen before. If any of you run into it, this was a new one, but we ran into one where one of our agents couldn't find any of the forms. There was just very few forms that came up for her. And there was a warning at the top that said, you're not a member of the board. And so all of the board licensed forms, which are the majority of these forms, are created by the UAR attorneys. So some of you wondering, why do I pay board dues? What does the board do for me? One of the biggest things they do for us is they have their attorneys that, they're constantly on the hotline, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We've got the UAR legal hotline. And so they're aware of all of the legal challenges that realtors are facing, which is what the public is facing. And they then create or tweak and adjust forms accordingly so that we can avoid those types of problems. So those forms are all listed out here. And when you're not a member of the board, typically you can't even get access to the MLS. But I think that's one of the things that has changed as a result of the recent big lawsuit back in Missouri against the NAR, is I think they're allowing people onto the MLS that aren't members of the board. So a regular real estate agent, not a realtor, can get access to the MLS, but they still would not have access to all of the board copyrighted forms. And I thought that was very interesting. I'd never seen that before. Usually you just couldn't get in. So that's something new. All right, we're going to just go down to the real estate purchase contract. And as a side thing, this little search here, we're going to, by the way, if you didn't know how to use that search thing, sometimes you can't remember the exact name of a form. If you remember any of the names in the form, then you can just type it in the search bar and you can find it. So it's a really quick way to get access to some of the forms really quick. So we're going to start with these two right here and just go through them. Now, this deep dive, if you've never joined me in a deep dive before, I don't want to take a ton of your time. We're going to try to end around 11:30, if that's okay with everyone. And you have a chance to jump in, to interact with me, to ask questions, but we're going to go down the rabbit hole a little bit. We're going to talk about mistakes that agents make that are very common. We're going to talk about why we do the things that we do. And there's a good chance, even with this most basic of forms, there's a good chance that we don't go through the entire contract, even in an hour. Okay, so let's start it out. Offer reference date. This is really easy to click. It's today. We do make a mistake a lot when we are just clicking on buttons and filling in fields. So I want to make sure that you guys have read through everything. One of the most common ones, in fact, if I go to add and remove forms, I'm going to add a form to this and give you an example. Let's say that we've got where's our exclusive right to sell? We're going to add that. Okay, let's say that we go to our exclusive right to sell. One of the common problems that agents make when they're just looking in to fill in the blanks is that they come in here and click this, and guess what? There's today highlighted. Boom, super easy, right? And they didn't take time to read it. And what it says when they read is the seller hereby grants the company, including the agent, as the authorized agent for the company, starting on the effective date as defined in section below. So it's starting down here. The effective date is when it's signed. So I click this and boom, starts today. And then we go back up here and it ends at 5 p.m. on the 9th day of January, 2024. Guys, I just made a 6-hour contract. We see this all the time. We see contracts that start and end on the same day. Sometimes they're signed at 6 p.m. at night. So technically the contract was never valid because the agent didn't actually read. Guys, people are paying us to know our contracts. This is one of our true values that we provide, is not look for blanks to fill in. So I expect more of you guys. I know you guys are, well, you guys are the better ones because you're here taking time to develop yourself. And so I appreciate that. But you need to not just look for blanks to fill in and click a box. And especially if you're doing this in front of clients and it's a little bit, I remember being a new agent and feeling the pressure of, I don't want to make a mistake. And so I'm doing the easy thing, or I think this is right. That's when you make mistakes. We have to prepare beforehand. Okay. So by the way, a quick little trip is I can come up here and auto-populate a form. So and I can go up here to a new tab because I don't want to lose my place. So here's one tab. Here's a duplicate one. Let's just go and find a listing really quick. We'll find one. We'll jump down here to listing. Who's got an active listing that we want to highlight? Anybody on here?
We can do my Plain City one. Let me get you the MLS number.
All right. All right.
Holding. MLS number is
192-946.
Yep.
Ah, kicked your butt.
Ah, bless.
Okay. So did I get that right? 190-2946. Yeah. Okay. So these are shortcuts. I went to auto populate forms. I typed in 190-2946, hit load, and boom, I've got the address, the tax ID, I've got the inclusions, exclusions. My name's going to auto populate. I don't know the seller's name yet, but it's all there. So I can go in here, fill update fields, and close that. And look at that. I've got a whole bunch of stuff filled in. So that's a pretty cool little trick, right? And then my buyer is John Smith. And actually I could do that here and put in the buyer name. And that would auto-populate throughout all the forms as well. Okay. So I've got John Smith. We've got the seller here, which is Jane Doe. And by the way, if I just type it in, it doesn't auto-populate everything I need, so if I went to the next form, I would see John Smith there. I wouldn't see Jane Doe. I'd have to retype that. Next, we've got the earnest money. We agreed to deliver it no later than 4 calendar days after acceptance. And by the way, how many of you remember, if I stop sharing the screen, what does Utah law say we have to have earnest money deposited by? Does anybody remember from their real estate exam? Jake's guessing 4 to 8.
Isn't it 4 days to get it to the office and then they have 4 days to get it deposited?
That's the contract. What does Utah state law say? Anybody remember?
I thought it was 3 days.
Yeah.
Thinking 3.
Yeah, so state law is interesting. It says 3 days unless, but it does specify in state law, it says 3 days unless stipulated differently in the contract. Now, some of the things with state law, you don't get to stipulate differently in the contract. Okay. You do need to stick to the contract by law. But in this case, the law actually says that we can change the days that earnest money need to be deposited. Now, how much earnest money can we do? Could I do 0? Do I have a valid contract with 0 consideration?
Yes, because the contract in and of itself has value. For Eric Lee.
Per Eric Lee? Good job, Rachel. It is true. You can't have 0 here. And a lot of agents, I have seen it taught incorrectly that you have to have some amount of consideration for this to be a valid contract. But the contract itself, my offer to buy your home, has value. That's the consideration. Okay, so I don't need a lot of earnest money. I can do 0 earnest money, and it is a legal contract still. So if you hear somebody say otherwise, they're wrong. I'm right. I'm big, they're little. Sorry, I'm quoting Matilda if you don't know. I'm big, you're little, I'm right, you're wrong. There's nothing you can do about it. That's my favorite quote. I use that with my children all the time. It won't be as fun when they're bigger than me, and it's ironic that it comes from Danny DeVito, who's like the smallest dude out there. Anyways, so I could put 0 in here. I could also put $100,000. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to talk. What are my pros and cons for putting a lot of earnest money down? $100,000. And if I'm a seller reviewing this offer, does this $100,000 offer this offer with $100,000 down of earnest money, is it stronger than an offer with $10,000 earnest money?
I'd say yes, but it's just risky for your client too.
For the buyer or seller?
For the buyer, if they're putting 100,000 down for earnest money. That's a little risky, but it's a strong contract for the seller.
Okay, in what ways is it risky for the seller?
No, I wouldn't say it's risk. Well, I don't know. I don't think it's risky for the seller if the buyer is putting down 100,000.
Okay, I'm gonna pick on some of you experienced agents. So Rebecca, you've been around for a while. Joe, you've been around for a while. I'm gonna go back to share the screen. And I'm gonna come down here to seller's disclosures. Okay, no later than the seller disclosure deadline referenced in section 24A, which usually we put like 3 days out. The seller is going to provide to buyer the following documents in hard copy or electronic format, which are collectively referred to as seller's disclosures. Seller property condition disclosure, right? Rebecca, Joe, you guys have been around for a while. I want you to unmute yourself for this little part here. How often of your offers that you make when you're working with buyers and sellers, how frequently is it that we get the seller's property condition disclosure by the seller disclosure deadline? What would you say? 100%
I
of the
would say
time?
most.
Most of the time, right?
Yeah.
What about this one? Lead-based paint disclosure. Do we get that by the deadline?
Normally.
Yeah, it's supposed to be attached to the
Right.
MLS.
Supposed to be attached to the MLS. Is that considered delivery?
No,
If it's attached to the MLS, if it's one of those included documents, have we accomplished this demand right here? Seller shall provide to the buyer the following documents. There's attorneys that make the argument says, no, it needs to actually be delivered. Okay, so just having it there available doesn't mean that it got delivered. So there's an argument there. How many of you get a commitment for title insurance from the seller as referenced in section 6.1? Let's go up to 6.1. Okay. Seller represents the seller has fee title to property, will convey marketable title to the property to buyer at closing by general warranty deed. Buyer does agree to accept title to the property subject to the contents of the commitment for title insurance provided by seller under section 7 and as approved under section 8. So, and it's all of, well, section 6.1 here. So how many of us as listing agents have, when you talk to the UAR attorneys, by the way, if we are doing this, that means we're not just, this isn't just the generic title that we've got it prepped in, you know, that PR report with the buyer named in it. So anyways, how often, whether it's actually prepped or not, how often do we get a commitment for title insurance from the seller by that seller disclosure deadline?
takes time to research if a prelim or when the listing is taken, a title is not contacted and asked to run report. So it can take longer than the 3 days to get the commitment.
Yeah.
On
What's your experience with this?
me?
Rebecca.
Oh,
Oh.
sorry. Yeah, I would say 50% of the time I get those, and that's being generous.
Okay. So 50% of the time, the seller has defaulted. Right?
Yes.
Now, when we get down here, CC&Rs. CC&Rs are a lot harder to get. If there's a 3-day, you know, because a lot of times we'll put 3 days for the seller's disclosures to come in because we're trying to move forward aggressively. We're trying to show them that as buyers, we are motivated. We're going to get our due diligence deadline out of the way. But for that, we need to get seller's disclosures pretty quickly. We're going to have our inspections done in the first week, right? We're going to be really on top of this. But a lot of times sellers, as soon as they sign that listing agreement, it's coming up active, and you've got an HOA that's not really cooperating. They actually passed a law. Was it last year, 2 years ago that they passed that law? Or has it been longer? That HOAs have to cooperate now. So state law, they have to cooperate, but still, even if they have to cooperate, it can take a little bit of time. Do you have all of these other things in here? Because if you don't have all of these things, because we typically think we've complied with the seller disclosure deadline by giving the seller's disclosures. But all of these things are required. And if we haven't done all of these things, then we come down here to the default section, and it could be a seller default. And if seller defaults, they've got 3 potential remedies listed here. Number 1, they can cancel the purchase contract, and this is the seller, mind you, and they're going to return that earnest money deposit. So if it's $100,000, they're giving back that $100,000 earnest money to the buyer, and if applicable, the buyer can elect, because the seller defaulted, the buyer can elect to accept from seller as liquidated damages a sum equal to the amount of the earnest money deposit. So if I've gotten $100,000 on an offer with $100,000 earnest money, does that represent a potentially significant risk to my seller?
Absolutely.
It does. And this is a conversation that I would want to have with my seller. And as a buyer, I want to have that conversation with my buyer. Like, hey, this doesn't necessarily make our offer stronger. It makes our offer very serious, but it could be scary too. And I have agents that understand this, that will actually push back and say, we want less earnest money because or we want to be very careful with our deadline. And even though they're being aggressive trying to get these things done quickly, we're going to push our seller disclosure deadline out a couple of weeks because we haven't had time to have a full title report. We haven't had time yet to get the HOA documents necessary. We want to make sure that we have those things in place, because that is the first and most common remedy for a seller default, is to get that earnest money back as liquidated damages. Okay. And now we're not going to go into the rest of the default section because we're not there yet. We're still way up here. But when you're reading this, when you're making the offer as a buyer, those are things to consider, is how that earnest money plays out with everything. Was there a, sorry, couldn't tell if there was a comment or a question tab. All right. In the form of check, obviously, if it's 100,000, we're going to need to do a wire for that amount. But let's say we're just doing 5,000. Okay. We'll make this offer more normal, I guess. And we can do the form of a check. And after acceptance by REPC, by buyer and seller, the receipt of the earnest money by the brokerage. So I've got 4 days to turn it into the brokerage, and the brokerage has another 4 days to get it deposited into the trust account. Which means by day 8, the seller could find out that that earnest money check bounced. We could be 8 days in. I could have already done my inspection. I could have already put in, spent $400 on an inspection before I even find out that that check bounced for me as the buyer. Okay. Or the seller finds out that that check bounced. So I'm not going to go deep into the woods of why we use the, I'm going to try not to. I have a hard time not going into the woods here of why we use the deposit of earnest money with title company addendum. By the way, did you notice that these things are already filled in, but the seller isn't, because I didn't put that in the auto populate. So I've got to come back in here and type Jane Doe. All right. By the way, if this is part of our offer, is this an addendum or a counter offer? Which box do I check? So I'm the buyer putting this together. I'm building this right now.
It's an addendum.
It's an addendum. A counter offer would be if this were sent to me after the original offer and we're countering back with this, or I forgot to include it in there, and so I've got to add it on after the fact. But right now, this is our addendum 1. It's an addendum to our offer, same date as today. Okay. Now, the thing about this, and this is required by state law. Does anybody know what the fine is for not including this form? Have you been reading your newsletters from the Division of Real Estate? It's typically $500. It's not a huge fine, but it's a $500 fine. That's a crappy way to spend $500. I'd much rather spend it in Palm Springs. Right, Brooke? That's right. Okay, sorry, Brooke went to Palm Springs over for New Year's or whatever, so picking on her. Anyways, the difference here when we're holding it with title company, and this is the reason why we have our policy to hold it with title, is because it's going to be held there instead of in the buyer's brokerage trust account. We're going to hold it with title. So we're going to, the title company is ABC Title. And by the way, I like to have this information saved in my phone if I'm building an offer, because I'm not carrying around their cards with me. I'm sometimes don't have my database in front of me when I'm building this out. So at least for my phone and that contact information for my favorite title person, I want to have all of this information saved. So this is one of the things that you guys can do now. If you don't have it now, pull out their card, go into your database, save all of this information in your phone. Because, you know, what is their address? Don't know. You know, I need to have that information, and 1555. Okay. And their email is guy at abctitle.com. Okay. So I want to have all this information handy. Now, attention. Buyer and seller advise that the title insurance company may require through separate written instructions that both the buyer and seller mutually authorize disbursement of earnest money deposit. Even if the REPC states, let me get to that in a second. Even if the REPC states that no additional written authorization is required, which may result in additional delays and costs for either party to receive the earnest money deposit. This paragraph right here is why this is villainized by a lot of agents. They're like, hey, my brokerage won't allow that because of this section right here. So I'll talk about that in just a bit and tell you why it's our policy to have it done this way. Brooke, do I need to fill this out with a buyer who is buying a new build? It depends. The reason it depends is some builders have their own contracts where they don't talk about earnest money. It's just the builder deposit that goes down. And so you want to read their contract. And what does their contract say? If it's a deposit that goes to the builder, then this really isn't relevant. There isn't earnest money. It's a builder deposit. If it is a builder using the standard purchase contract, then yeah, we would want to include this in here, because some of the smaller builders, they haven't had attorneys put together their own contracts for them. Most of the bigger builders have, because our regular purchase contract is so friendly to buyers. Like, buyers can get out for any reason whatsoever. And if we go back and look at the purchase contract, we can see we're going to jump down to due diligence, because that actually falls in line with talking about earnest money. So we jump down here to due diligence. And if it is subject to due diligence, then this part right here, if buyer determines in their sole discretion that the results of the due diligence are unacceptable, they can cancel. Okay. If buyer determines in their sole discretion. Now, builders don't like that, because a buyer could change their mind for any reason. And in fact, if we go to add and remove forms and we look at the buyer's notice of cancellation, okay, right here. We go down to the buyer's notice of cancellation form. And if you guys have watched any of my trainings on cancellations, which are important, by the way you do these is important. You come down here, if we're canceling based on the due diligence deadline, do you all see an option in here to type in why? What was our due diligence objection? Do you see any place to explain what our reasoning is? Nope.
No.
I'm going to stop sharing so I can look you all in the eyes. In case you haven't watched my cancellation section, we don't share, because we have a fiduciary duty, and one part of that fiduciary duty is confidentiality. So if I share with the seller, or maybe I have bonded with the agent and my buyer is being completely unreasonable. Do we ever have unreasonable buyers? Yep. Kind of all the time. So my buyer's being unreasonable. And maybe the other agent is somebody that I've worked with. Maybe I'm good friends with them. Okay. I've seen them at the other meetings. It could be another equity agent, doesn't matter, but we're friends, or we're just worried about our own professional reputation. And my buyer is being unreasonable. And they're just like, I don't agree with them canceling. I've tried to talk some sense into them. They're moving back into their mom's basement so that they can save up money to buy next year. And I know that inflation is going to outpace them. And I've talked with them so many times and it just doesn't make any sense. And I'm very frustrated with my buyers. So I fill out this cancellation form and I send it over to the seller and maybe in an email. I've seen it written out in email like, hey, my buyer's a complete asshole. I'm really sorry about this. I've tried to talk some sense into them, but they're canceling. They don't really have a good reason. They're gun shy and they've decided to move in with their parents. Okay. I've seen agents write it out, even calling their names clients in the email. Guys, let's say that buyer then, or the seller, excuse me, receives that notice of cancellation. And as a listing agent, you've got a fiduciary duty for full disclosure, right? So you share that whole thing with your sellers. And it says right in that email, we don't have a good reason to cancel. Now, what does the contract say? Buyer's sole discretion. Do they need a good reason to cancel by that deadline? They don't. It's their sole discretion. But when I go ahead and open my mouth and I say, we don't have any good reason to cancel, and let's say that we've drugged this out for 3 weeks, sellers have passed up other good offers, maybe they've even started the move out process. Have I opened up my buyer to some liability?
Yes.
Yeah, because and not only have I done that, but I have violated my fiduciary duty. I've violated my confidentiality. I've shared some things. So let's say that the seller then says, okay, we're suing you for that $5,000 earnest money. And we go back to the contract and say, you can't sue us. It says in buyer's sole discretion. And they say, yeah, but we've got this email from you. And let's say that they do choose to pursue that lawsuit, whether they'll win it or not is irrelevant. Okay, we put in some inflammatory language that's causing them to be emotionally worked up. And so we go to court. And in court, they pull up this email and they say, Eric Lee, do you recall sending this email to the buyer that says, my buyer is an asshole. I'm so sorry for all of this. And your buyer's sitting there thinking, are you kidding me right now? You said that about me? And that's being entered in to evidence. Guys, is this a far-fetched scenario? Am I being too far-fetched here, or do you think this is realistic?
No, it happens.
This is
It
100%.
does happen.
Yeah, this is 100% realistic. I'm not being far-fetched. Okay. I've dealt with the agent. I've seen the letters. Okay. What is that buyer then going to do to their agent?
Go after the agent.
They're going to go after the agent. The attorney's going to be the one saying, hey, we should be suing this guy. If you lose this earnest money or all of my attorney's fees are caused by this one email, you're going to need to sue that agent. Okay. So we're back to our forms. Guys, we haven't even made it past the first paragraph of the purchase contract. We are 20 minutes in. Do you see why I call this a deep dive? Isn't this fun? So we go back to our forms with our cancellation and we see a notice of cancellation here prior to due diligence. We check that box, our clients sign it, done. We send it over in the email and we can say, I'm sorry, things didn't work out. Good luck to you. And then they call us up and say, whoa, I thought things were going good. We got your pre-approval letter. What's going on? What's the problem with the property? I mean, my sellers are willing to fix this. My sellers are willing to do some repairs. What was the problem with it? I'm sorry, I can't disclose. Right? Like if my buyers want out, if it is something that we can fix, then we've talked about that. And I'll have that conversation with my buyers and say, hey, this is something that could be fixed. We can fix this. We can move on. We can save the contract. But if my clients have said, no, we're done, I want out, that's all I can say. I don't get to elaborate to that other agent. I have to pull my basically agent-client privilege card and say, I'm sorry, that's privileged. I can't discuss the reasoning. And then the only thing that they have to go back on is they're frustrated, they're angry, they're upset, but they have no ammunition to sue us. All they have is this, that if buyer determines in buyer's sole discretion. And that's what they go back to their clients with and say, yeah, it sucks. And no, I don't know why they canceled. This is all we have. And it would be a fool's errand to try to sue them because they have that right by this language here. Okay. So we're up here. Sorry, we were talking about the deposit of earnest money with title company addendum, why we use this. We use this form. It's our practice to use this because in my experience with, geez, I just hit 21 years. 21 years in real estate. Woohoo! With my experience, 21 years of real estate, overseeing the largest brokerage in the state, you know, we do even other brokers that are prominent brokers. Okay. The amount that we oversee here is last year was one of our lowest years, and it was around 6,000 transactions. We've had years over 10,000 transactions, nearly 1,000 transactions a month. Guess where most of our problems come from? Is it from title companies? No, it's not. It's from brokers mishandling the earnest money. Okay. And it's because brokers don't ask the question. They look at that language, which I really don't like. This language in the purchase contract says in buyer's sole discretion. And in fact, let me jump back to that. All right. Whereupon the earnest money deposit shall be released without the requirement of further written authorization from the seller. We did this because it makes it easy. Makes it really easy to get the earnest money released. They've canceled in their sole discretion. And as the broker, if I'm holding that earnest money in my trust account, which we do have a trust account, it's required by law. If I'm holding that in my trust account, then this allows me to release it back to the buyer without requiring further written authorization from the seller. Whereas if we look at this form, this says title companies are bound by different rules. They're not bound by the terms of the contract, and it may require that both buyer and seller mutually authorize the disbursement of that earnest money. So regardless of what language in that contract says, I still may have to get both signatures to get that earnest money released. And again, opponents of this addendum say this is why we don't use it, because it makes it impossible to get the earnest money released. The truth is that out of the 22 states that equity operates in, Utah is the only state that does this, that holds earnest money in the brokerage trust account. Every other state holds it in escrow, which is our policy. And they do it because it protects the buyer. Okay. What protection does your buyer have if, let's say that or seller even, okay, because I've had it happen where the buyer goes into their brokerage, gives them a copy of the purchase contract. And by the way, I've run this scenario past brokers in board meetings. I was president of the Brigham Tremont board. I'm on the board of directors for the current one. I've run this past many broker owners. Every one of them always gives me the wrong answer. And the scenario that I give them is a real life scenario that your buyer brings you a purchase contract and he says, hey, I'm representing the buyer on this. We're canceling today. Can you release the earnest money to my clients? The broker takes it, they scroll down, and sure enough, the due diligence deadline was January 23rd. And so they're like, oh yeah, we're 2 weeks ahead. And because this says in buyer's sole discretion, that they're going to release it without requiring further written authorization, the broker, without making any phone calls, without checking with the listing agent or the listing broker, or asking their agent for signatures or anything, they look at this language and they say, yep, it's clearly prior to buyer due diligence deadline, so we can release it. Boom. And they cut a check and release it. Here's the problem in my real life scenario is that earnest money was supposed to have been delivered within 4 days. It was delivered on day 9. And it was delivered on day 9 with an ultimatum that changed some of the terms of the contract. It was delivered with an addendum to the contract that had been accepted 9 days earlier, saying we want to change these terms. And the seller said, no, I don't want to change those terms. And so that earnest money that was delivered on day 9, now that agent takes it in to his broker and says, we're canceling prior to due diligence. We need to release this earnest money. But what's happened since the earnest money wasn't delivered till day 9? What do we actually have here?
You have the buyer in default.
We've got a buyer default. And so because the buyer defaulted, then as liquidated damages, the seller can get their earnest money, right?
Right.
So in this case, what if, I'm going to stop sharing here so I can again look you in. I always look you in the eyes when we're talking serious stuff, right? Let's say I'm a smaller brokerage, which there are a ton of smaller brokerages around, right? I'm a smaller brokerage. It's $1,000 earnest money, which in this case it was. Okay, got $1,000 earnest money, and I release it to my buyer because why ask questions? The contract is very clear. Every broker I talked to about this would have done the same thing. They would have released it to their buyer. Okay, and the next day I get a call from the listing broker. He says, by the way, we're making a claim on that earnest money. It wasn't turned in until day 9. That's a buyer default. We get the earnest money. That $1,000 has already been released. You call up your attorney, and your attorney, in our case, they did call their attorney. The attorney confirmed this is a buyer default. You own the earnest money. If you've signed a release as a buyer broker, as the buyer's brokerage, you're the managing broker for them. You signed that release. Are you going to call that client up and get them to bring back that $1,000? They're not going to do it, are they? They're not bringing that money back to you. Okay.
Typically, they don't.
No, they never will. Right? So you don't get that earnest money back, but it's owed. And who's at fault for releasing it? You are. You didn't ask questions, right? So what do? Dip into your own pocket. Give them $1,000. What happens when that earnest money is $100,000? You, as the buyer's brokerage that just rent and released it because you were so confident in the language of that contract, and then that buyer says, I'm not bringing it back. We canceled. And you say, but it was a default because you didn't get it turned in until day 9. They say, tough. Okay, now what do? Because if you don't bring it back, you get reported to the division, you're going to get sued, you're going to lose it anyways, and you're going to be fined on top of all of that for mishandling earnest money. Can you dip into your pocket and pull out $100,000 to try to make things right? No, you can't. So this is why we have the policy that we hold it with title. It's because title asks the question, have you talked with both parties? If everybody agrees, they sign the paper, piece of cake, it's done. Does that happen all the time? Nope, it doesn't. Sometimes one of the parties says, no, I think that earnest money is mine. It should be mine. And I talk to them and I say, and by the way, this is my policy on this, okay? If you want to hold earnest money in my trust account, in Equity's trust account, I will allow that. However, you need to communicate to the listing agent, because listing agents say, hey, we don't want earnest money with title. It's too hard. We want you to hold it in your trust account. Okay, we can do that. We're not going to lose a deal negotiating over that one point. However, what I will ask of you as the buyer's agent is to communicate to that listing agent, by the way, my broker's policy is if this deal falls apart, he's still going to want written authorization from both parties to release it. And doing anything other than that is absolute insanity on the part of the managing broker. Okay, it is just completely irresponsible. So if you're holding it in my trust account and I get a release form and I get instructions to release this and it's not signed by both parties, I'm going to say, have you talked to the other party about this? Are they on board? Yep, they're on board. Okay, get the form signed. And they get the form signed and easy, it's released. If you say, you know what, have you talked to the other party? And they say, yeah, but they're not very happy with this and they don't sign it. Then I'm going to need to make a phone call and I'm going to talk to the other party. And I'm going to say, what's going on? And if they have a legitimate claim, they feel like they have a legitimate claim, then they have a right by the contract to be heard out, whether that's mediation or go to court or whatever it is. They have a right to be heard. All right. And that will resolve most of it. Every once in a while, you get somebody that's completely unreasonable and they say, you know, I call them up and they say, yeah, I know I'm wrong, but I'm pissed. I'm not going to make it easy. You know, that money can go rot in that trust account forever until it's turned into the state. They actually, interestingly, know that that money is turned into the state after a while of not being claimed. And they say, I don't care. I'm not going to sign it. And I say, you do understand you're wrong here? Yeah, but they made me keep my home off the market for 3 months. I'm pissed at them. I'm not going to make their life easy. When that happens, I'll release the earnest money. Okay? Because they know they're wrong. When it's held at title, I still have, you know, and we can't get a signature. I call the title company and I say, I'm the managing broker for Equity Real Estate and I'll accept full responsibility. I'll put it in writing, talk to your attorneys, and their attorneys say, okay, this is what we need. And they give me the language. I put it in writing that I accept full responsibility for the release of that earnest money, which is the same thing as if I were releasing it from my own trust account. And I tell them, yeah, I've had a conversation with the seller. They know they're wrong. They're just being assholes. And when you know you're wrong, you don't go and add thousands of dollars of attorney's fees when that earnest money is released. So I get it released. So effectively, what our policy does when we hold it with the title company is it at least ensures that that conversation took place, which should be happening in every instance when earnest money is released. Both buyer and seller should be contacted and make sure that they're fine with it. And if that conversation hasn't taken place, which it almost never does when it's held with the brokerage trust account, then there is some significant risk for both the buyers, the sellers, and the brokerage in how that was handled. Okay. All right. We're past the first paragraph and we're a half hour in. Let's talk about included items. Now, we filled this in off of the MLS, right? So I've got all of these things mentioned in here. How many of these things, should I go and delete any of this? I mean, it was auto-filled off the MLS. That's good, right? Should I delete any of this stuff right here? Or should I just leave it as is on the MLS?
I delete the ones that are listed in 1.1.
Perfect, Rebecca. Thank you. So this is again where agents can prove their value because 1.1 has a whole bunch of stuff listed. Like I've got a range. Is that listed up here? There it is. I don't need that in here, do I? Now, what happens if I leave that in here? For you experienced agents, what happens if I just leave all this stuff in here? Is there any harm in leaving it?
There's no harm in leaving it, but it makes it more confusing if there's problems later.
It makes it confusing. And what complications does it bring up with lenders?
I would guess if it's a multiple situation, like you put there's the range is included, but you add a range, maybe there's supposed to be a second one. I don't know. Maybe it just, or, oh, no, I got it figured out. Because they're lending on the home, not on personal property.
Yep, exactly it. So if you have a whole bunch of stuff listed here like this, the underwriter sees that and they say, we want you to remove all of these things from the contract. Okay. And you've created a problem for yourself. You're requiring an extra addendum. It may add concerns, later on. You're requiring an addendum to be added, which the sellers don't have to sign. And if the sellers don't sign that addendum and you can't get the loan, maybe the sellers are looking for a reason for this deal to die because they've got a better offer waiting. They've got, you know, a backup offer that's going to net them $10,000 more. And so you bring this to them and say, hey, sorry, it's just a little housekeeping issue, but we need to remove the microwave from this. And the seller says, no, I'm not signing an addendum. And now we can't clear underwriting. And I mean, it's a crazy situation, but it could absolutely happen, did happen. You know, the sellers looking for ways to cancel. It was very common over the last few years when things were crazy, right? So we've created a problem for ourselves again, because we're looking for we're looking for blanks to fill in without knowing what's already written. So all of the things in here, okay? Alarm systems, ceiling fans, dishwashers. I can check a box here with refrigerator and I can get rid of that, okay? Satellite equipment, that's mentioned up here. I can get rid of almost all of these things. Window coverings are mentioned up here. So I do want to, even though I've auto-filled it, I've auto-populated, it makes things easy. I want to make sure that I am aware of what's up here so that when I fill these things out, I'm not either duplicating it, which can create confusion, as Rebecca said, or creating problems with the lender that I'm going to have to fix later on that could jeopardize my position. Okay. Now, if sometimes we're selling a place that does have a ton of inclusions, okay, up in Park City or even up in Ogden Valley, you're selling a condo. A lot of times they come fully furnished. If they come fully furnished, then what we want to do is we want to check this R box. The above items shall be conveyed to the buyer under a separate bill of sale with warranties as to title. In addition to any boxes checked in section 1.2 above, there are additional items of personal property buyer intends to acquire from the seller at closing by separate written agreement. Okay, there is a form for that for us in here. Does that form get submitted to the underwriter?
Only if they ask.
If the underwriter asks, yeah. Otherwise, no. And it's not loan fraud because we're telling them right here, there is a separate written agreement for personal property. If the underwriter asks for it, they can see it. If they don't, then we're good. We haven't committed loan fraud by having, you know, that is the definition of a double contract, by the way, having a separate written agreement. But if we're telling them right in the contract, we have a separate written agreement for personal property, then we're okay. We're in compliance. All right. But otherwise, you're going to inevitably have the lender come back a week prior to closing and say, hey, underwriters flagged all this stuff. We're not going to lend on all the personal property. We're only lending on real estate. So you've got to add an addendum taking out all of this stuff. All right. So water rights or water service, basically it's going to include all water rights and water shares, if any, that are the legal source for the seller's current culinary service and irrigation water service, if any, to the property. They will be, the water rights or shares will be conveyed to buyer at closing by applicable deed or legal instruments. And then this is only for things that are excluded. So if there are water rights or water shares, then again, we come down here to the seller's disclosures and evidence of all of those are required right here. That's part of the seller's disclosures is, hey, we do have some water rights or water shares. And we have to have all of those ready. So if I'm the listing agent, I need to know this section right here of seller's disclosures. I need to have this conversation with my sellers. Are there any water rights or water shares? If so, I need evidence of those. Let's get something on copy, okay? So that we can comply with our deadlines and make sure that we're not in default later on. All right, let's say we've got a $500,000 purchase price.
Hey, Eric, can I ask a question real quick on the water?
Yeah,
So in my situation, the water rights have already been turned over to the city, so the city has them allocated to the property, but they don't belong to the seller anymore. So do you think maybe I should just get something from the city that says that?
I would get details from the city on exactly what is there. What can they use? What rights do they have for it? What's that?
Okay, cool,
Okay.
thanks.
All right, so
I
I've got
just say cool, thanks.
500,000 thank you, 500,000 purchase price. I got $5,000 earnest money deposit. I could have additional earnest money, which would drop me down to section 8.4, but we're not gonna do that this time. And then we've got a new loan, okay? So it is good for us. Obviously, we want our buyers pre-qualified before we're making offers. But more than just pre-qualification, we want to have a conversation with the lender saying, okay, I know they're pre-qualified. Are they going to be bringing other money down? Okay. Because we've got a new loan for this, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're 495. But what if I haven't had time? My lender's out of town. Okay. I can't get an answer for them. There's zero purchase, there's zero balance brought in here. I've got a total of 500,000. What if later on I do talk to the lender and the lender says, oh no, they're bringing in 20% at closing. You know, they're going to go conventional. They're going to bring in 20% at closing. We've got 5,000 here, but they're actually going to be bringing in an additional $95,000 as settlement. But I didn't know that when I wrote up the offer. I didn't know that, and so I wrote up the offer like this. Have I created a problem?
No.
No,
Okay, and why not?
because it says right up there that it may be adjusted if deemed necessary.
Okay, so this is really good. Now, again, the more information I have, the better, because honestly, guys, what looks better to you? The one I had earlier or this one? This makes me look like a stronger buyer, doesn't it? We got 20% down. I'm going to have less loan problems. I've got some cash in the bank. You know, maybe if there's some issues with the appraisal, there might be some flexibility here. I'm not like right on the wire. So this looks like a better offer, but I could have written it the other way if I didn't have that information. I could have written it and it's still valid because of this language right here. But certainly if I can take the time to talk to the lender and find out the details of the loan, this is going to be very important and it's going to make my offer look a lot stronger. All right. Then we've got this sell of buyer's property. Buyer's ability to purchase the property to obtain the loan referenced in section 2.1 above and or any portion of the cash referenced in 2.1E is or is not conditioned upon the sale of real estate owned by the buyer. So let's say that I have my buyers are selling their other property, but it's already under contract. It's supposed to close in 5 days. Okay. And when it does close, that's how I'm getting all of this cash. Okay. So until then, all I have is $5,000 earnest money, but when it closes in 5 days, I'm good to go. Okay. We'll have all of this. We're good. Can I check is not?
Nope. You cannot.
But we're closing it in 5 days. In fact, I'm going to give them 6 days to respond to my offer. By the time their response deadline comes around, we should be closed. Can I do it now?
I'm still gonna go with no.
Okay. Good job, Rick. Way to stand your ground. Okay. It is this offer as written today. I don't have all that money. And so I need to be honest about it. And what I can do, even though I'm going to have now the subject to sell buyer's property addendum, because it's going to be required at this point, because I checked is, what I'm going to do is in my cover letter to the seller with my offer, I'm going to say, hey, we're already under contract. And it's actually mentioned in the subject to sell addendum, but I'm going to say we're already under contract. Buyers are really strong. We've already cleared due diligence. We've cleared the finance and appraisal deadline, closing in a couple of days. So should be good to go. And this all of a sudden isn't a detriment. But if I lie on this and I say, well, we are going to be closing soon, now I have created a detriment because I haven't negotiated in good faith. And so this whole contract, once you get attorneys involved, they could look at that and say, you didn't negotiate in good faith, so this contract is void. So I'm actually, by thinking I'm making it stronger, if I lie, I've actually weakened my client's position. So I want to keep it there at is. Now, settlement and closing, you guys know all of this stuff, but your clients don't know it. Because how often do we say, hey, when we've got the clear to settle, When do you want to schedule settlement? Does anybody ever use that language? Hey, I'm going to settle on my property today. We never use that, do we? We always say we're going to close. We got clear to close. We're going to go close on this property today. Hey, we just closed. Congratulations. We just closed on this. Nobody says congratulations. We just settled on this. When was the last time you saw a Facebook post, with the clients and their just sold sign saying just settled? Doesn't happen. But your clients don't understand the difference between this. Make sure that you do. Okay. Settlement is when we go and sit down and sign. Closing is when, let's see. Closing means the settlement has been completed, meaning everybody's signed. So settlement again, buyer and seller have signed and delivered to each other, the escrow closing offices, all the documents required by the lender, title insurance, closing office, etc. Any monies required, except for the proceeds of the loan, have been delivered. So, if they were bringing this 95,000 cash in, that's been wired there in the form of cash, wire transfer, cashier's check, whatever. All of that stuff has been done. So settlement has been completed. And then for closing, the proceeds from the loan has been delivered as well. See this up here, settlement didn't need the proceeds of the loan, but for closing it does. And it's been recorded in their name. And they have 4 calendar days after settlement for closing to take place. So if I close on Friday, if I do my settlement on Friday, we go in and we sign all the paperwork. I've got actually till Tuesday for closing to happen. So my settlement deadline, if I come down here, settlement deadline could be, let's say Thursday, right? So we go in, we sign our paperwork on Thursday, and we have met our settlement deadline, but it doesn't fund and record until Monday. And the sellers are like, they're upset because, sorry, I don't mean to change the deadline. The sellers are upset because they want their cash right here on the 19th. It didn't fund and record the next day. Tough. Okay, that means that their agent did not explain to them properly the contract, that it could take longer to fund and record. You have 4 days to do it, and you're not in default until the 23rd rolls around. But these are 4 calendar days. So they've got 19, 20, 21, 22. It's got to fund and record by this day, even though the settlement deadline was the 18th. So we can still fund and record by the 22nd, and we are compliant with the contract. We're not in breach. Okay. So that's the difference between settlement and closing. Now, possession. What is the best rule for possession? Is it upon recording? Is it a certain number of hours after recording? Several calendar days after recording? What's the best rule of thumb here?
Depends on your client, your seller.
Okay, could depend on the seller. We might want to be a little bit flexible. It could make our offer stronger to give them 7 days after recording. Bless you, Brooke. I don't see everybody here, but I see a few people. Anyways, if I do it upon recording, that is the safest way, because now it's legally the buyer's property, and it's nice to have the seller out. It's nice to have the buyers be able to move in immediately, but sometimes that isn't always possible. Sometimes we want, as buyers, our offer to be a little bit stronger. So we're going to say, yeah, we'll be flexible. In fact, instead of offering $5,000 higher than the competition, like, what really matters to you? And they'll say, once we sell this, we're still not closing on our next house for 3 or 4 days. And we say, great, let us give you that. We can be flexible. My clients are renters right now, or they're living with their parents right now. They're not going to be homeless. We can give you 7 days after recording. Okay. What if I want to give them 3 months? 90 days after recording. Could I do it?
You can if it's cash, but not if they have a mortgage on it.
Why is that? What's the difference?
Because it's mortgage fraud if they don't occupy the property within 60 days.
Why?
Because a mortgage is, it's not an investment property. So it's the rates and the interest rates will be better if they are occupying the property. They sign a form at closing saying they will occupy the property within 60 days. And also, my favorite one is that they like won't build bombs and stuff.
All right. So what Rachel said is something that isn't actually written in the contract. It just comes with knowledge and experience. So I'm down here saying, hey, we've got, where was I? We've got 90 days. We'll give you 90 days. We'll give you 3 months to move in, right? And that sounds really cool. And we can work it out. We'll just be really flexible with you. But we're committing loan fraud because at closing, your buyers are going to sign paperwork because they intended to own or occupy this home. They're saying they intended to occupy the home within 60 days. That's what owner occupancy means. It's the terms of that they're going to sign at closing. And again, you wouldn't know that by reading this contract, but it's part of the closing documents. And so we can, in something like that, we've got a short-term lease back addendum. And right here, buyer is strongly advised to consult with buyer's lender regarding the potential impact of this addendum, especially if the rental period is 60 days or longer. Because at that point, if they haven't talked to the lender, they could be committing mortgage loan fraud. Okay? So be aware of it. You could do a longer term lease back. And if you do that, you know, typically if it's anytime within a couple of days to a week maximum, I won't use this form. But what are my dangers of giving them, let's say I give them 2 weeks. What are the dangers of 2 weeks? And it could be 7 days. You could even have some of these dangers apply after 3 days. It's just a question of risk assessment. But you experienced agents, let's say that I give them, in the purchase contract, I give them 14 days to occupy the property. What are the risks that I'm going to be facing here?
You mean the risk to the seller
Yeah.
or to the buyer? I mean,
Where's my
the risk to the buyer?
The buyer.
yeah,
The
and
buyer,
quite frankly, we're both at risk because any lawsuits affect everybody. Attorneys are expensive. But what are the risks that I'm going to be facing by giving 14 days for possession? Let's talk about buyers first. What are the buyers' risks?
the buyers are now the owners. And so if the seller decides not to get
Their
out, you
insurance.
got to foreclose on them, or not foreclose, but you'd have to evict them.
Yeah, it's going to be a little, and it's going to be hard to, so thank goodness we're not California, right? California does not have very friendly rules regarding this type of thing, but if we've let somebody live in the house and we don't have a lease agreement that details terms of eviction, then are we facing an eviction or are we facing a foreclosure? Or how do we kick them out? Because people that abuse these types of things are actually pretty educated. I don't know if you guys have seen the posts. There's like these $1 million homes in California where somebody's been living there for over 1.5 years and they can't kick them out because they don't have clear terms of eviction or anything. And the person says, oh no, they invited me to be here, and all sorts of garbage reasons for it. But so that's one risk, getting them out. Let's say that it doesn't fund and record for some reason. Or it does fund and record and they just, you know, something got delayed with their new home that they were going to buy. And so the seller just isn't moving out. That could be a problem the longer we let them stay. What other risks do we have? Buyer, you own the property. What if the seller slips and falls?
Yeah, you're now under liability insurance wise.
Yeah, they're
You're the
moving,
one insuring the house, right?
they're moving their piano and somebody lets it slip and it falls down and breaks their legs. Okay. So who's responsible for it? So here's some of the things that this short-term lease agreement does is it defines, okay, we're gonna let you rent. All right, terms of this shall survive closing. So we're gonna define the rental period here. We're gonna say, we're letting you stay. Here's our per diem. You know, it's $100 a day. So you're gonna pay us $1,400 for the 2 weeks. You're gonna pay us in this form. Buyer and seller agree that we can shorten this period because maybe we do close early, so we can get out earlier and we can give you some notice here. In the event the rental period is shortened, we can prorate that rent or not prorate it here. Here's another concern here. You know, this is a risk for both people, is just a misunderstanding. So yeah, we closed on it. Who's responsible for utilities? Do we transfer everything over immediately to the buyer and they're going to pay for everything even though they still don't have access to it? So this lines that out. Is there a security deposit? What if, because they're living there for an extra 2 weeks, what if they're damaging some of this stuff? Right? What right of entry do I have? What position? Alterations. Here's a penalty for that holdover tenancy that Rebecca was mentioning. That, you know, they're not leaving. And so we have to go through and fight it. All right, what about liability? Right? The buyer isn't responsible for personal injury or damage, or, you know, the house burns down, so we've got all their personal property in there. We're not responsible for that. The seller is now required to get renter's insurance to protect those personal things. All of those things that we could be concerned about are mentioned in this short-term leaseback addendum. So if we come in here and we're being very friendly and we're saying, we're going to give you, geez, I keep scrolling right past it. We're going to give you 14 days. We can be very friendly with this, but we don't want to be stupid about it. Okay. There are all sorts of risks, things that could happen that can affect both buyers and sellers. Even such simple things as who's paying the utilities for these 2 weeks. And those details do matter to people. And so I think this is a new record, guys. We're an hour into it. I told you we'd end at 11:30 and we have made it to section 3. Yay. Was this valuable to anyone?
Yes.
Yes,
So lots of things to, and did you notice how we started out and we kept going in and adding forms because, well, if this happened, then we got to look at this form. This is one of the lessons that I want to drive home as a result of this training, is how important it is for us to know our forms. Just know the tools that are there in your toolbox. The contract itself references some of the forms, but knowing that they're there, knowing the protections that are included in those forms, this is how we truly serve our clients. We, in our mastermind group this morning at 9 o'clock, our challenge to the group is to communicate your value 10 times a day. We're not just talking to people, we're communicating our value. And the goal that we have here is helping people understand that we are so much more. As a buyer's agent, we are so much more than, hey, we're going to help you find a cool home. Because you know what? And I tell my buyers this when I meet them. I said, I can't stop you from looking. I know better than that. You're going to be on your computer at night because this is exciting. The odds are that you'll find your own home. That is not the number one value that I provide. Here is the value that I provide, and I detail out some of this understanding in the forms. That's part of your buyer presentation. Communicate your real value. It is not in finding the home. Lots of your buyers will find their own home because it's exciting. It's fun. It's like Christmas morning. Every time they get on the computer and they're looking through all of those cool homes that are available, they're going to do that. Okay. Whether you do it for them or not, they're still going to keep doing it. Our true value is understanding how to protect our buyer through all of these different things. And I want to applaud you guys for taking the time to attend this training. If anybody is going to just watch the video after the fact, I applaud you for watching it after the fact. Even if you can't attend our regular Tuesday meeting, the fact that you watched the video to get this knowledge is commendable for you. And this is the kind of thing that makes you valuable. So I want you to understand your value that you have. I want you to do a better job of communicating your value to your clients. make sure that they understand this is what I bring to the table. How many of your clients would understand any of those things that we talked about? From simple little things like inclusions and exclusions that could derail underwriting, or at least require an addendum, which could kill the contract if the sellers don't want to sign that addendum because they're looking for a way to get out of it. Right? That is the simplest, tiniest little detail. And yet that one simple thing can mean the difference between you getting your home or not. Tiny little details matter, and we provide so much value with those details. So I want you guys to, have these discussions with people, do buyer presentations with people so that they can truly understand the great value that a real estate agent brings to the transaction. So thank you guys for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Good luck to all of you in your business this year. I think we're gonna kick some ass. It's gonna be a good year. Jake's giving me fireworks. All right.
Nice,
Thanks,
Jake.
Eric.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.